Maya Rodriguez never thought she'd find peace in a place like Millbrook Avenue. After 15 years of classified missions in countries she couldn't even name, this quiet street in suburban Atlanta felt like stepping into someone else's life. The small houses with their chain-link fences and overgrown gardens were nothing like the war zones she'd called home for so long. She'd chosen the name Maya Richards for her new civilian identity. Simple, forgettable, just another working woman, trying to make ends meet. Her neighbors knew her as the polite lady from house number 47 who worked some desk job at the VA hospital. They had no idea that just 6 months ago, she was leading Delta Force operations behind enemy lines. The retirement had been her choice, though her commanding officers tried everything to make her stay. At 35, Maya was still in her prime, still faster and deadlier than soldiers half her age. But something inside her had finally cracked during that last mission in Syria. Maybe it was watching too many friends come home in body bags. Maybe it was realizing she'd forgotten what normal people talked about at dinner tables. Either way, she'd turned in her resignation and walked away from the only life she'd ever known. Rex changed everything. She'd found the German Shepherd 3 years ago during a rescue operation in Afghanistan. The poor animal was guarding the body of his dead owner, a local translator who'd helped American forces. Something about the dog's loyalty broke through Maya's carefully built walls. She'd pulled strings to bring him back to the States, and Rex had been her shadow ever since. In Millbrook, Rex was her bridge to normal life. Every morning at 6 sharp, they'd walk the same route around the neighborhood. Rex would sniff at fence posts while Maya nodded to the few early risers heading to work. Mrs. Chen from the corner house always waved from her kitchen window. The teenage kid next door would sometimes ask to pet Rex before catching his school bus. These small interactions felt precious to Maya. For years, her conversations had been tactical briefings and mission reports. Now she found herself discussing the weather and comparing grocery store prices. It was ordinary in the most beautiful way. Maya had chosen this neighborhood carefully. The houses were older, the kind that working families could actually afford. She didn't want to live somewhere fancy where people might ask too many questions about her past. Here, everyone minded their own business and respected privacy. The house itself was perfect for her needs. Small enough to maintain easily, with a fenced backyard where Rex could run. She'd made only subtle modifications, things that wouldn't draw attention. A reinforced front door that looked standard but could stop a battering ram. Security cameras, disguised as regular outdoor lights. A basement workshop where she kept a few essentials from her old life, locked away like artifacts from another person's existence. Rex adapted to civilian life better than Maya did. The dog had always been smart, but in Afghanistan, that intelligence was focused on survival. Here, he used it to charm the neighbors. He'd learned which houses had children who might share snacks, which elderly residents enjoyed his company, on their front porches, and exactly when the mail carrier made his rounds. Maya's favorite time was evening walks. After dinner, she and Rex would take a longer route through the neighborhood. She'd watch families through lit windows, seeing glimpses of the life she'd never had. Kids doing homework at kitchen tables, couples arguing over what to watch on TV, teenagers sneaking out to meet friends. It all seemed wonderfully, impossibly normal. But Maya's training never truly left her. Even during peaceful walks, part of her mind automatically cataloged potential threats and escape routes. She noticed which houses had broken porch lights, which cars had been parked in unusual spots, and which residents seemed to be struggling financially. old habits from a lifetime of staying alive in dangerous places. That's how she first noticed the crimson serpents moving into the area. Maya spotted the signs weeks before other residents realized what was happening. Young men in red clothing hanging around specific corners, cars with tinted windows making frequent stops at certain houses, the subtle changes in body language when people passed these new groups on the street. The gang wasn't particularly sophisticated, but they were organized. They focused on small-time drug dealing and protection schemes, targeting working-class neighborhoods where residents couldn't afford to fight back. Maya had seen similar operations in dozens of countries. The methods were always the same, only the faces and languages changed. At first, she told herself it wasn't her problem. She'd left that life behind. She was just Maya Richards now, a woman, who worked at the hospital and walked her dog twice a day. Getting involved would mean risking the peaceful life she'd worked so hard to build. The gang's leader went by Carlos Santos, though Maya doubted that was his real name. He was maybe 25, with prison tattoos and the kind of swagger that came from never facing real consequences. His main enforcer was Tommy Vega, a stocky man with dead eyes who did most of the intimidating. Maya first encountered them during a Thursday evening walk. 3 gang members were standing outside the corner store, blocking the sidewalk and making families cross the street to avoid them. When Maya approached with Rex, they didn't move. "Nice dog," Tommy said, but his tone made it sound like a threat. "Big animal like that needs protection in a neighborhood like this." Maya kept her expression neutral, her voice polite. "He's friendly, we're just walking." "Everything friendly needs protection," Carlos added, stepping closer. "Things can happen to pets when owners don't take proper precautions." Rex sensed the tension and moved slightly in front of Maya, his ears alert but not aggressive. Maya's hand found the spot behind his ears that always calmed him. "We're fine, thank you," Maya said, stepping around them. "Think about what I said," Carlos called after her. "Protection is important in changing neighborhoods." Maya kept walking, but every nerve in her body was firing warning signals. She'd heard similar offers in a dozen different languages. The gang was testing her, seeing if she'd be an easy mark or potential trouble. Over the following weeks, the tests became more obvious. Gang members would time their corner gatherings to coincide with Maya's walks. They'd make comments about Rex being valuable, about how easy it would be for someone to grab a dog that wasn't properly watched. The threats were never direct enough to report to police, but the message was clear. Maya's neighbors began changing their routines. Mrs. Chen stopped opening her curtains in the morning. The teenager next door started catching rides to school instead of walking to the bus stop. People hurried past certain streets and avoided eye contact with anyone wearing red. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late September. Maya had been called in for an early shift at the hospital, disrupting her usual routine with Rex. She'd given him extra food and water, knowing she'd be gone most of the day. When she returned that evening, exhausted from dealing with administrative paperwork that made no sense to someone used to clear military orders, Maya found Rex waiting by the front door with unusual intensity. The dog was alert, almost agitated, pacing between the door and the front window. Maya let him into the backyard, thinking he just needed to stretch after being inside all day. Rex immediately ran to the back fence, barking with an urgency she'd never heard from him before. Following him outside, Maya found fresh footprints in the soft soil beneath her kitchen window and scratches on the back gate where someone had tried to force the lock. Someone had been in her yard. Someone had been watching her house while she was gone, probably trying to figure out her schedule. The territorial violation sent ice through Maya's veins, awakening instincts she'd tried to bury in civilian life. That night, Maya sat in her darkened living room with Rex beside her, watching the street through slightly parted curtains. Cars passed occasionally, but twice she saw the same red sedan cruise slowly past her house. The second time, it stopped for almost a minute before moving on. Rex sensed her tension and pressed closer against her leg. Maya ran her fingers through his thick fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. In Afghanistan, Rex had been her early warning system, alerting her to dangers she couldn't see or hear. Here in suburban Atlanta, he was trying to do the same job. Maya realized with growing dread that her quiet life was already over. The gang had marked her as a target, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. She could try talking to police, but she knew how these things worked. Without concrete evidence or actual crimes, law enforcement couldn't do much against implied threats and suspicious behavior. For the first time since moving to Millbrook Avenue, Maya went down to her basement workshop and opened the locked cabinet, where she kept reminders of her old life. Her fingers traced over items she'd hoped never to need again, tools designed for a much darker world than suburban neighborhoods. But she closed the cabinet without taking anything. Maya Richards was a civilian now, a woman who worked at the VA hospital and loved her dog. She wouldn't let the Crimson Serpents drag her back into violence. She'd find another way to handle this situation, some peaceful solution that didn't require becoming Commander Rodriguez again. 3 days later, on a Friday morning that started. Like any other, Maya kissed Rex goodbye and headed to work, still believing she could keep her two lives separate. She had no idea that by evening everything would change forever. Maya's world shattered at 6:23 a.m. on a Saturday morning. She was 3 blocks from home, finishing her usual jog around the neighborhood, when she heard the gunshots. 3 sharp cracks that echoed off the quiet houses like thunder. Her body reacted before her mind could process what was happening. 15 years of combat training kicking in automatically. She sprinted toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she rounded the corner onto Millbrook Avenue, Maya saw Tommy Vega and 2 other gang members climbing into a red car. The engine roared as they sped away, tires squealing against the asphalt. Rex was lying on her front lawn. Maya dropped too, her knees beside him, her hands already searching for the wounds. 3 bullet holes, 2 in his chest and 1 in his shoulder. Blood was spreading across his golden fur, soaking into the grass beneath him. His brown eyes found hers, still alert, but fading fast. "I'm here, boy. I'm right here," Maya whispered, pressing her hands against the worst wound. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and thick. Rex's tail gave one weak wag, like he was trying to tell her everything was okay. But everything wasn't okay. Rex's breathing was getting shallow, his eyes losing focus. Maya had seen enough battlefield injuries to know what was happening. Her best friend, her only real companion in this new life, was dying in her arms. "Please don't go," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please stay with me." Rex's eyes fixed on her face one last time. His breathing stopped. The neighborhood fell, silent except for Maya's ragged sobs and the distant sound of morning traffic. Maya cradled Rex's still body, something fundamental breaking inside her chest. The careful walls she'd built around her civilian identity cracked like ice in spring. Maya Richards, the quiet hospital worker who minded her own business, began to dissolve. In her place, something darker and far more dangerous started to emerge. Mrs. Chen appeared at her fence, drawn by the commotion. "Oh, honey, what happened? Should I call someone?" Maya looked up, her face streaked with tears and Rex's blood. "No," she said quietly. "I'll handle this myself." The old woman must have heard something in Maya's voice because she stepped back and disappeared into her house without another word. Maya carried Rex to the backyard, her movements mechanical and precise. She'd performed this ritual too many times before, in too many countries, for too many friends, but never for someone who'd meant this much to her. She dug the grave with her bare hands, 6 feet deep in the soft soil behind her vegetable garden. Rex had loved this spot, always lying in the shade of the old oak tree while Maya worked with her tomatoes. It seemed right that he should rest here. As she worked, Maya's mind shifted into tactical mode. The gang members had waited until she was away from the house. They'd known her jogging schedule, probably watched her for days. This wasn't random violence or a warning shot. This was calculated murder, designed to send a message. They'd killed Rex because they thought she was weak, because they believed a quiet woman living alone would be easy to intimidate. They had no idea what they'd just awakened. Maya lowered Rex into the ground and covered him with dirt, each shovelful feeling like a promise. When she finished, she planted a small rose bush over the grave. Rex had always liked the smell of roses. During their evening walks, "I'm sorry I wasn't here to protect you," she whispered to the fresh earth. "But I promise they'll pay for what they did." Then Maya went inside and became someone else entirely. The first step was reconnaissance. Maya had been watching the Crimson Serpents casually for weeks, but now she studied them like the enemy combatants they were. She mapped their territory, identified their hangouts, and cataloged their daily routines with military precision. Carlos Santos lived in a rented house 6 blocks away, easily identified by the constant stream of visitors and the red car parked outside. Tommy Vega had an apartment above a pawn shop on Fletcher Street. The gang used the old gas station on Martin Avenue as their main meeting spot, dealing drugs from the abandoned service bays. Maya observed them for 72 hours straight, taking notes on their schedules, their habits, their weaknesses. She counted weapons, identified lookouts, and memorized faces. Carlos liked to sleep until noon and always bought coffee from the same corner store. Tommy had a gambling problem and spent most evenings at an illegal poker game in the back of Rodriguez barber shop. But watching wasn't enough. Maya needed to get inside their heads, to make them understand they'd made a terrible mistake. She started with psychological warfare, the kind of invisible pressure that drove people to paranoia. Tommy's car wouldn't start Monday morning. When he popped the hood, he found his battery cables neatly severed, cut with surgical precision. No random vandalism or angry slashing, just clean cuts that spoke of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Carlos discovered his morning coffee tasted wrong. Not poisoned, just bitter in a way that made him spit it out and demand a fresh cup. The barista insisted nothing was different, but Carlos couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Small things started disappearing from their operations. Not enough drugs to notice immediately, but little amounts that added up over time. Cash would be missing from collections, always in round numbers that suggested careful counting rather than random theft. Maya used skills she'd learned in a dozen different countries, techniques for destabilizing enemy operations without leaving fingerprints. She moved through their territory like smoke, there and gone before anyone realized she'd been present. The gang's paranoia grew daily. Members started accusing each other of stealing. Trust broke down as everyone became suspect. Carlos began changing his routines randomly, never visiting the same place 2 days in a row. But Maya adapted to every change, always staying one step ahead. She'd spent years tracking insurgents who knew the terrain better than she did. A group of small-time drug dealers was child's play in comparison. After a week of psychological pressure, Maya escalated. She began leaving calling cards, small reminders that someone was watching them. Tommy found a photo of Rex tucked under his windshield wiper. No message needed. Carlos discovered his apartment door unlocked one evening. Nothing stolen, but everything. Slightly moved, like someone had searched through his belongings with careful hands. The gang's frustration boiled over into violence, but they couldn't identify their tormentor. They roughed up rival dealers, thinking another gang was making a move on their territory. They questioned neighbors aggressively, demanding to know if anyone had seen suspicious activity. Maya watched their desperation with cold satisfaction. They were making mistakes now, acting without thinking, drawing unwanted attention from police and community leaders. Their operation was falling apart from the inside, and they still didn't know who was destroying them. 2 weeks after Rex's death, Maya decided it was time for direct contact. She waited until Tommy was alone, walking back to his apartment after another losing night at the poker game. Maya stepped out of the shadows when he was halfway down the alley behind the pawn shop. "Tommy Vega," she said quietly. He spun around, his hand reaching automatically for the gun tucked in his waistband. But Maya was already too close, her own hand covering his before he could draw the weapon. "I wouldn't," Maya advised, her voice calm as winter ice. "We need to talk." Tommy tried to pull away, but Maya's grip was like steel. He found himself looking into eyes that held no fear, no uncertainty, only cold purpose. "You killed my dog," Maya continued, her tone conversational. "Rex was a good dog. He never hurt anyone. But you shot him 3 times and left him to die on my lawn." "I don't know what you're talking about," Tommy stammered, but his voice shook with sudden fear. Maya smiled, and Tommy felt his blood turn cold. There was nothing human in that expression, nothing that belonged in a suburban neighborhood. "You and your friends have been having some problems lately," Maya observed. "Things going missing, equipment failing, feeling like someone's watching you all the time. That's me, Tommy. I've been studying you like a bug under a microscope." She released his hand and stepped back, but Tommy didn't reach for his gun. Something in Maya's posture warned him that moving would be the last mistake he ever made. "Here's what's going to happen," Maya continued. "You're going to go back to Carlos and tell him exactly what I'm telling you now. You killed the wrong dog, and you messed with the wrong woman. I want all of you gone from this neighborhood within 24 hours. Pack up your operation and find somewhere else to play gangster." "And if we don't?" Tommy asked, trying to sound tough but failing completely. Maya's smile widened, and Tommy actually took a step backward. "Then you'll discover that some people are much more dangerous than you could possibly imagine," Maya said, softly. "I've been playing games with you for 2 weeks, Tommy. Small stuff just to get your attention. But if you force me to get serious, you won't enjoy what comes next." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quietly as she'd appeared. Tommy stood in the alley for 5 minutes before his legs stopped shaking enough to carry him home. The next morning, Carlos Santos called a meeting of all his crew members. When Tommy finished telling them about his encounter with the mystery woman, the room fell silent. "It's just some crazy lady," Carlos finally said. but his voice lacked conviction. She thinks she can scare us because we put down her mutt. But privately, Carlos was remembering all the strange incidents of the past 2 weeks. The feeling of being watched, the subtle signs that someone had been in his space, the way his normally tight operation had started falling apart. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't just some grieving pet owner. She moved like a professional, thought like a soldier, and struck like someone who'd done this kind of thing before. Carlos made his decision. Instead of backing down, he would show this mystery woman what happened to people who threatened the Crimson Serpents. He would make an example that the whole neighborhood would remember. It was the worst decision of his life. Carlos Santos had never backed down from a fight in his life. Growing up on the rough streets of East Atlanta, he'd learned that showing weakness was the fastest way to become a victim. When Tommy told him about the mystery woman and her threats, Carlos felt his reputation was on the line. "She thinks she can scare us with some mysterious act," Carlos told his crew the next morning. "This lady doesn't know who she's messing with." But privately, Carlos was more worried than he let on. The past 2 weeks had been like nothing he'd experienced before. His operation was falling apart in ways that made no sense. Equipment failed at exactly the wrong moments. Money disappeared in amounts too precise to be random theft. His most trusted dealers were becoming paranoid and unreliable. Still, Carlos had an image to maintain. If word got out that the Crimson Serpents had been spooked by one grieving woman, every small gang in Atlanta would see them as weak. Other crews would move in on their territory. His own members might start questioning his leadership. Carlos made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his very short criminal career. Instead of cutting his losses and moving to another neighborhood, he decided to make an example. He would show this mystery woman what happened when people threatened his organization. "We're going to pay her a visit," Carlos announced to his crew. "Find out where she lives and teach her some respect." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, I'm telling you," there was something different about this woman. The way she moved, the way she talked. "Maybe we should just—" "Maybe you should remember who's in charge here," Carlos snapped. "We don't run from nobody, especially not some crazy lady with a dead dog." Carlos called in reinforcements from other Crimson Serpent chapters around the city. By Wednesday afternoon, he had 8 heavily armed gang members ready for what he assumed would be a simple intimidation job. They would break into the woman's house, trash the place, and make it clear that threatening their crew was a fatal mistake. Maya had been expecting this escalation. From her surveillance post in the abandoned house across the street, she watched the gang members gather outside Carlos's place. Through high-powered binoculars, she counted weapons and identified faces. 8 men, all carrying handguns, 2 with automatic weapons. They were preparing for war, but they had no idea what kind of enemy they were about to face. Maya spent Wednesday morning making final preparations. She'd already modified her house into what military tacticians called a fatal funnel, a controlled environment where attackers would be channeled into predetermined kill zones. But Maya had no intention of killing these gang members, at least not yet. She wanted them alive and terrified, capable of spreading word about what happened when you crossed the wrong person. Thursday afternoon, Maya made a show of leaving for work at her usual time. She drove her modest sedan out of the neighborhood, making sure the gang's lookouts saw her go. But instead of heading to the VA hospital, Maya parked 3 blocks away and circled back on foot through yards and alleyways she'd mapped weeks earlier. By the time Carlos's crew reached her house, Maya was already inside, waiting. The first gang, Member through her back door triggered a tripwire that released a cloud of pepper spray from a modified fire extinguisher. He stumbled backward, coughing and rubbing his eyes, straight into a carefully placed pressure plate that activated a flashbang grenade. The explosion wasn't lethal, but in the confined space of Maya's kitchen, it was devastating. 3 gang members were temporarily blinded and deafened, stumbling into each other in confusion. Maya moved through her own house like a ghost. She'd practiced these movements hundreds of times in similar buildings across Afghanistan and Iraq. Every step was planned, every angle calculated. The gang members were stumbling through a maze designed by someone who understood urban warfare better than they understood their own neighborhood. In the living room, 2 more attackers fell victim to Maya's preparations. She'd rigged the floorboards to collapse under weight, dropping both men into the basement. They weren't seriously injured, just trapped in a space Maya had prepared specifically for prisoners. The remaining gang members tried to regroup in Maya's hallway, but Maya was already behind them. She'd moved through the walls using access panels she'd installed during her first week in the house. A tap on the shoulder made one gunman spin around, only to walk face first into a low-hanging beam Maya had positioned at exactly the right height. "What the hell is happening?" Carlos shouted, waving his pistol wildly. "Where is she?" His answer came in the form of smoke grenades rolling down the stairs from the 2nd floor. In seconds, the house filled with thick, choking smoke. The gang members couldn't see their hands in front of their faces, let alone identify targets. Maya, wearing military-grade night vision goggles, moved through the chaos like a predator. She disabled opponents with precise strikes to pressure points, techniques learned during hand-to-hand combat training that most people couldn't even pronounce. Each gang member went down quietly, efficiently, without Maya firing a single shot. When the smoke cleared 20 minutes later, Carlos found himself alone in Maya's living room. His 7 crew members were unconscious, zip-tied, and arranged in a neat row like sleeping children. Maya sat in her favorite armchair, no longer wearing her hospital scrubs. Instead, she was dressed in black tactical gear that looked like it had seen serious use. "Hello, Carlos," Maya said calmly. "We need to talk." Carlos raised his gun with shaking hands, but Maya didn't move. She just sat there, looking at him with the same expression she might use to study an interesting insect. "Go ahead," Maya said, softly. "Pull the trigger. But ask yourself this first. If I wanted you dead, would you still be breathing right now?" Carlos's finger hesitated on the trigger. Looking around at his unconscious crew members, he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. This woman had taken down 8 armed men without breaking a sweat. She'd turned her own house into a military operation, and Carlos had walked his people straight into a trap. "Who are you?" Carlos whispered. Maya smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm someone you should never have messed with. I'm someone who spent 15 years hunting people much more dangerous than you. And I'm someone whose dog you killed, for no reason except to prove how tough you thought you were." She stood up slowly, and Carlos instinctively stepped back. Maya moved like a trained fighter, every gesture controlled and purposeful. "Here's what's going to happen," Maya continued. "You and your friends are going to leave this neighborhood and never come back. You're going to find some other place to sell your drugs and play gangster. Because if I see any of you around here again, our next meeting won't be nearly this pleasant." "And if we don't?" Carlos asked, trying to sound defiant but failing completely. Maya's expression darkened. Then I'll show you what I learned during 15 years of hunting terrorists in countries you can't even spell. This little demonstration was me being nice, Carlos. You really don't want to see what happens when I stop being nice." Carlos looked again at his unconscious crew members, then back at the woman who'd taken them down single-handedly. For the first time in his criminal career, he was genuinely afraid. "There's one more thing," Maya added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know where you live. I know where your mother lives. I know which school your little sister attends. I know about your girlfriend's job at the grocery store and your cousin's auto repair shop. If anything happens to anyone in this neighborhood, if so much as a window gets broken, I'll assume it was you, and I'll come looking." The threat hung in the air like smoke from the grenades. Carlos realized with growing horror that this woman had been studying his entire life, mapping his connections and vulnerabilities with the thoroughness of a professional intelligence operative. "Take your friends and get out," Maya said, gesturing toward the unconscious gang members. "And Carlos, when you're telling this story later, make sure you get the details right. I want every gang in Atlanta to know exactly what happened here today." Carlos didn't argue. He dragged his crew members out of the house one by one, loading them into cars like sacks of grain. Some were starting to regain consciousness, groaning and asking confused questions about what had happened to them. As the gang drove away from Millbrook Avenue, Carlos made a decision that probably saved his life. He called a meeting of all Crimson Serpent leadership and announced that their crew would be relocating to the south side of the city immediately. He didn't give details about why, just said they'd found better opportunities elsewhere. But word of the incident spread anyway. Gang members talk, especially when something unbelievable happens to them. The story grew with each telling, becoming legend among Atlanta's criminal underground. The quiet woman who'd taken down 8 armed men without firing a shot. The mysterious fighter who could disappear and reappear like a ghost. The suburban house that had become a fortress designed by someone who understood warfare better than anyone had a right to. Maya cleaned up the evidence of her preparations, removing tripwires and pressure plates, disposing of empty smoke grenades, and zip ties. To any outside observer, her house looked exactly the same as always, a modest home belonging to a quiet hospital worker. But Maya knew her peaceful days were over. Word would spread about what had happened here. Other gangs might decide to test themselves against the woman who'd humiliated the Crimson Serpents. Law enforcement would eventually start asking questions about the sudden exodus of criminals from a previously troubled neighborhood. Most importantly, Maya had crossed a line she'd sworn never to cross again. She'd become Commander Rodriguez, the Delta Force operative who solved problems with precisely applied violence. Maya Richards, the woman who just wanted to live quietly with her dog, was gone forever. Standing in her backyard that evening, Maya looked down at Rex's grave. The rose bush was starting to bloom, small red flowers that would have made her friend happy. "I kept my promise, boy," Maya whispered to the fresh earth. "They won't hurt anyone else in this neighborhood, but I think our quiet life is over." The wind rustled through the oak tree's leaves, almost like Rex was trying to tell her something. Maya closed her eyes and listened, remembering all the walks they'd taken together, all the peaceful evenings when the biggest worry was whether to plant tomatoes or peppers in the spring garden. Those days felt like they'd belonged to someone else entirely. Tomorrow, Maya would have to decide what came next for a trained killer trying to live in a world that kept pulling her back into violence. But tonight, she would sit with Rex and remember what it felt like to be happy. Maya thought her war with the Crimson Serpents was over. For 3 weeks after the incident at her house, The neighborhood remained quiet. Carlos and his crew had vanished completely, leaving behind only empty corners and abandoned drug houses. Mrs. Chen started opening her curtains again. The teenager next door went back to walking to his bus stop. Life in Millbrook Avenue returned to something resembling normal. But Maya should have known that men like Carlos Santos don't give up easily. Pride is a dangerous thing when mixed with stupidity and desperation. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Maya was having coffee in her kitchen. Her secure phone, the one she'd kept from her military days, buzzed with an encrypted message from Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, her former commanding officer. Rodriguez, the message read, heard some interesting chatter about Atlanta gang activity. Word is spreading through criminal networks about a ghost operative taking down crews single-handed. Thought you should know there's heat building around your location. Stay sharp. Maya stared at the message, her coffee growing cold. She'd hoped the Crimson Serpents incident would be the end of it, but Davidson's warning confirmed her worst fears. The story had spread beyond Carlos's crew, becoming legend among Atlanta's criminal underground. Other gangs would be curious. Some might decide to test their skills against the mysterious woman who'd humiliated 8 armed men. She was proven right that very afternoon. Maya was walking back from the grocery store when she spotted them. 3 cars with tinted windows, cruising slowly through the neighborhood. Not Crimson Serpents, but members of a rival gang called the Iron Wolves, identifiable by their gray and black colors. Maya changed direction, taking a longer route home while observing the cars. They were conducting reconnaissance, mapping the area, looking for the woman who'd become a ghost story among Atlanta criminals. Maya counted at least 12 gang members spread across the 3 vehicles, all of them armed based on the way they sat and moved. That evening, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't keep reacting to threats as they appeared. The story of what happened to the Crimson Serpents had turned her into a target for every ambitious gang leader who wanted to prove their reputation. She needed to end this cycle before it consumed her completely. Maya went down to her basement, workshop, and opened the locked cabinet she'd hoped never to touch again. Inside were the tools of her former trade, equipment that belonged to Commander Rodriguez, not Maya Richards. She pulled out tactical gear, communication devices, and weapons that most civilians never got to see. But as Maya was checking her equipment, her secure phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Davidson. The message came from an unknown number, but the words made her blood run cold. "We know who you are, Maya Rodriguez, former Delta Force commander. We know you live at 47 Millbrook Avenue. We know you killed Carlos Santos's operation, but we also know something you might find interesting. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., Lincoln Elementary School has recess. Lots of children playing outside, including some from your neighborhood. Would be terrible if something happened to them. Meet us at the old Morrison Warehouse on Industrial Boulevard at 2 p.m. if you want to keep those kids safe." Maya read the message 3 times, her hands shaking with rage. These weren't the Crimson Serpents. Carlos would never threaten children. This was someone new, someone who'd done their research and decided to use the most evil tactic possible to draw her out. Lincoln Elementary was where the kids from her neighborhood went to school. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, the teenager next door's little sister. Children who had nothing to do with gang wars or military operations, kids who just wanted to play on swings and slides without fear. Maya tried calling the school, but what could she say? That an unknown gang was threatening to attack during recess based on an anonymous text message? The principal would think she was crazy, and even if they believed her, canceling recess wouldn't solve the problem. The gang would just pick another time and place. Maya spent that night preparing for what she knew would be her final operation as Commander Rodriguez. She studied maps of the warehouse district, identified escape routes, and planned for multiple contingencies. But unlike her previous encounters with the gangs, this time Maya wasn't planning to capture or intimidate. Anyone willing to threaten children had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The next morning, Maya visited Rex's grave one last time. The rosebush had grown fuller, its red blooms bright against the green leaves. She knelt beside the small headstone she'd placed there, running her fingers over the engraved words, Rex, faithful friend and guardian. "I have to go away for a while, boy," Maya whispered. "There are some bad people who want to hurt kids, and I can't let that happen. You understand, right? You always protected the children in this neighborhood. Now it's my turn." The wind rustled through the oak tree's branches, and Maya imagined it was Rex's way of saying goodbye. Maya arrived at the Morrison warehouse 30 minutes early, using the extra time to scout the area and identify threats. The building was perfect for an ambush. Multiple entrances, lots of cover, dozens of places where shooters could hide. Whoever had chosen this location knew what they were doing. At exactly 2 p.m., Maya walked through the main entrance. The warehouse was dark inside, lit only by sunlight streaming through broken windows. Her footsteps echoed off concrete floors as she moved deeper into the building. "Commander Maya Rodriguez," a voice called from the shadows. "Finally, we meet." A man stepped into the light, flanked by 8 heavily armed gang members. Maya didn't recognize him, but his military bearing and tactical equipment told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't some street gang leader. This was someone with professional training. "My name is Vincent Cross," the man continued. "Former Army Ranger, dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming. I've heard some very interesting stories about your work here in Atlanta." Maya kept her expression neutral, her hands relaxed at her sides. "What do you want, Cross?" "What I want is simple," Cross replied. "You've been interfering with business operations in this city. Your little war with the Crimson Serpents cost my organization money and territory. We can't have freelance operators disrupting our plans." Maya looked around at Cross's men, noting their positions and equipment. Professional mercenaries, not street criminals. This was much more serious than gang rivalry. "And the school threat?" Maya asked quietly. Cross smiled, and Maya felt ice in her veins. "Insurance policy. I needed to make sure you'd come alone and unarmed. Children make excellent motivation, don't they?" "You're not going to touch those kids," Maya said, her voice deadly calm. "That depends entirely on you," Cross replied. "Here's the deal. You disappear from Atlanta permanently, and the children stay safe. You refuse, and tomorrow's recess becomes a tragedy that gets blamed on gang violence. Your choice." Maya was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical situation. 9 armed opponents in a confined space with limited cover. Not impossible odds for someone with her training, but definitely challenging. More importantly, she had no guarantee that eliminating Cross would stop the threat to the school. "I need time to think," Maya said finally. "You have 5 minutes," Cross replied, checking his watch. "After that, my men head to Lincoln Elementary for target practice." Maya closed her eyes, accessing the calm center that had kept her alive through 15 years of combat operations. When she opened them again, Cross saw something that made him take an involuntary step backward. "I've made my decision," Maya said softly. "But first, let me tell you a story about a dog named Rex." For the next 4 minutes, Maya told Cross about her quiet life in Millbrook Avenue, about morning walks with her best friend, about trying to build something peaceful after years of war. She spoke about Rex's loyalty, his gentle nature with children, the way he'd made her feel human again. Rex never hurt anyone, Maya concluded. He was just a good dog who deserved a peaceful life. But your friends killed him to send a message. They thought I was weak because I wanted to live quietly. Cross was getting impatient. Time's up, Commander. What's your answer? Maya smiled, and Cross felt his blood turn cold. There was nothing human in that expression, nothing that belonged in the civilized world. My answer is that you made one critical error in your intelligence gathering, Maya said calmly. You found out who I used to be, but you never learned why I retired from Delta Force. She moved like lightning, faster than Cross's mercenaries could react. Years of muscle memory took over as Maya became the ghost operative that gang members whispered about in scared voices. The fight was over in less than 3 minutes. When the warehouse fell silent, Maya stood alone among 9 unconscious bodies. She'd used every non-lethal technique in her arsenal, but Cross and his men would wake up with injuries that would remind them of this day for the rest of their lives. Maya zip-tied the mercenaries and called Davidson on her secure phone. Within an hour, military police arrived to collect Cross and his team for prosecution under federal anti-terrorism statutes. Maya learned that Cross had been running illegal military contractor operations across 3 states, using gang connections to move weapons and drugs. As the sun set over Atlanta, Maya stood in the empty warehouse and made her final decision. Maya Richards was gone forever, buried beside Rex in the backyard of 47 Millbrook Avenue. Commander Rodriguez had returned, but not to the military life she'd left behind. Maya drove home slowly, stopping at Lincoln Elementary to watch children, playing on the playground. They were safe now, laughing and running without fear. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter was pushing her friend on a swing. The teenager's little sister was playing hopscotch with a group of classmates. Rex would have loved seeing them play safely. Maya packed her belongings that night, taking only what she could carry. She left the house deed with Mrs. Chen along, with instructions for maintaining Rex's grave. The rosebush would need water every few days, especially during summer heat. At dawn, Maya stood one last time beside Rex's resting place. The memorial garden had grown beautiful, red roses blooming beside white daisies and yellow marigolds. Rex had always liked flowers during their evening walks. I kept my promise, boy, Maya whispered to the morning air. The children are safe, the neighborhood is safe, but I can't stay anymore. There will always be people like Cross, people who mistake kindness for weakness. Maya heard a car horn in the distance, her ride to the airport. She was going back to active duty, but not with Delta Force. A new government task force needed. Someone with her particular skills, someone who could operate in the gray areas between military and civilian law enforcement. Maya walked away from Millbrook Avenue without looking back, carrying memories of morning walks and quiet evenings with the best friend she'd ever known. Rex had taught her that protecting innocent people was worth any sacrifice, even giving up the peaceful life she'd dreamed of building. Some battles never truly end, Maya realized. But some fights are worth everything you have to give. The neighborhood settled into peaceful quiet as Maya's taxi disappeared around the corner. Mrs. Chen opened her curtains to check on Rex's garden, making sure the flowers had enough water. Children caught their school bus without fear. Life in Millbrook Avenue continued, protected by the memory of a woman and her dog who'd cared enough to fight for something good. And in the growing morning light, Rex's roses bloomed brighter than ever before.